welcome. It's really good to have you all here. I'm delighted to welcome you all on behalf of the Methodist Church Learning Network in the North East. My name is Fiona Fidgen and my colleague Trish Mitchell, who's going to wave. Yay. We are holding the fort as part of the Learning Network team, and it's really good to have you here. Usually when we have events in the Northeast, we gather people usually in the Northeast, usually Methodist Church folks, and today we seem to have quite an international group of people with us, which is quite exciting. So welcome. It's really good to see you all here. We've got some friends, I think, coming in from the States. I think it's early morning breakfast time in America, and some friends from Scotland and some of my friends from the Iona community. So it's really good to have a whole collection of people here with us. And I think this is really interesting because what this is perhaps showing us is this great interest in hybrid church and what it is that perhaps we are seeking of understanding what God is revealing to us about the nature of church at the moment. And this whole idea of what kind of church are we becoming is something that we're interested in exploring today. And we have a whole variety of I guess, here, some of whom are very familiar and have been working and being church in the digital age for a long time. I can see Joy, she's here on my little screen, thank you. And David and Rob from the Northeast, all the D Church folks. If you haven't checked out D Church on Facebook, please do that. And some academic friends here who have been exploring the digital for a long time. And there'll be many of us who are totally new to digital, who perhaps have discovered all sorts of gifts and skills on Zoom that we didn't know that existed sort of 6 months ago. And here we are discovering a whole new kind of way of being church and developing community, praying with each other online in ways that we perhaps haven't done before. So a whole variety of interests and skills and at different kind of places and contexts where we are in church. So welcome, and it's really good to have you all with us today. Let's gather ourselves together and bring ourselves to God. And so as we quite often sit in Zoom, and we're quite often sitting in front of a screen for a long time, the invitation, friends, if you are able, I'd like to invite you to stand. I'm not going to necessarily stand, because as soon as I stand and I move away from my screen, you can't see, I can't be seen. My voice doesn't carry quite as well as it should do. But if you're able, I'm going to ask you to stand and to just put your hands out in front in this kind of position of being open to God. And let's just pause and bring ourselves to God as we gather today, and perhaps holding our hands, the kind of physical church and the digital church, and bringing those together. And in this time, we open ourselves to God. What is it that we are noticing? What is it that we need to be attentive to? What is it that we are challenged by, or indeed even excited by? We hold those who have discovered Christ and discovered church in the digital, and hold those for whom the physical church has been their place of worship. And we open all of these and ourselves to God this afternoon. Amen. So I sent you out a wee sheet that had a whole raft of resources on it, one of which was this spectrum of hybrid church from our colleague Adam in the Midlands. And this is the kind of context that Adam has suggested that we might be in, and maybe you are somewhere along this spectrum. So on the one hand, a church with no online presence, and on the other hand, a church which is completely online and completely digital. Perhaps you are somewhere along this spectrum, and perhaps the hybrid church, and Pete might correct me, but the hybrid church might be this bit, church where online and offline participants can all become members and fully participate. So along that kind of spectrum, just have a look at that yourselves and begin to think, where and where do I want to be? Where is God calling me to be? Am I, somewhere along the kind of more to the no online presence? And if I need to move along, what's stopping you or preventing you from doing that? Is it about your skill set? Is it about having a digital deficit in some areas that we live in? Is it about access to the digital, not just internet, but in terms of platforms and physicality of equipment? And how are we encouraging those kind of people for whom physical church is the norm to have conversations and to be part of a church in the digital? And we know, and Pete might say a bit more about this, but we know that evidence has told us that more people have been coming to church, more people have been asking about God and about prayer in the digital space than we have been aware of them doing in a physical space. So all of these things are terribly good and terribly exciting. And we need to pay attention to what is actually going on here. What is it that God is revealing to us, and how do we notice it, and how do we pay attention to it? So we're going to watch a video now. This is a conversation that happened between Joe Cox-Darling, a Methodist minister, and Pete Phillips, also a Methodist minister, and we're delighted to welcome Pete here this evening, this afternoon. Gosh, you can tell I've been on Zoom for a long time. And Pete's going to have a wee conversation with us after our breakout rooms and after we've heard this. Pete, I don't know if you could just unmute yourself for a minute. Do you want to tell us when this was actually recorded? Because I'm guessing it's a couple of months old by now.
I think it was kind of when the Romans took over Rome back in the day, sometime over the summer we recorded it. Yeah, and then it was used for the Methodists in the Midlands conversation as well. So it was ages ago, probably somewhere either towards the end of the first lockdown and the beginning of the kind of summer opening.
Okay, so here's a conversation between Joe and Pete, and we'll listen to this, and then we're going to go into breakout rooms to reflect on some of that. And we'll have an opportunity to hear from Pete where things have perhaps moved on a little bit in terms of the hybrid church understanding, and then an opportunity to have questions and answers with Pete. I know that we said that we would finish at 3. Now that we've actually got him here, we might just slightly go over depending on how the conversation goes, but we'll see how that goes. So here's the wee conversation that we will be listening to.
Pete, it's really lovely that you are here with us today, and thank you for sharing with us this conversation about hybrid church. In case people aren't really familiar with you at the moment, can you tell us who you are and who you're working for and some of the things that you're most interested in?
Hi, thanks very much. Good to see you, Jane. So my name is Pete Phillips, and I'm Head of Digital Theology at Premier Christian Media. I'm also a Research Fellow in Digital Theology at Durham University. I'm a Methodist minister, and I was formerly Secretary of the Faith and Order Committee for 6 years or something like that. I also teach New Testament. I taught New Testament at Cliff College for a while. So a whole load of different things I've been doing. What you were saying kind of what interested me about hybrid church. And I think that's quite an interesting thing because it's become quite a passion for me, and kind of the sense that a lot of people kind of pick up from some of my posts and everything is that what I want to do is kind of refashion the whole church and everything. Whereas really, I just want to make it easier for us to contextualize church in the 21st century, rather than impose a new form of church upon anybody.
Thank you. I think we came across the phrase of hybrid church when we started writing a small Grove booklet together, and we can talk about that towards the end of our conversation. So for me, it's been a useful piece of shorthand to describe what I've accidentally found myself doing whilst we've been in lockdown. So at the point in which church can no longer meet within our buildings, this discovery of how to do online work and to develop discipleship that is based using online tools whilst taking our offline face-to-face interaction seriously as well. What for you is an important feature and definition of hybrid church?
Yeah, so I think this is really interesting. I think you're right. We've stumbled across hybrid. I was playing around with the idea of doing the best of both worlds. So that something happened during the COVID crisis is that the church had to go online because all of our chapels closed, all of our churches are closed, and if you wanted to continue some form of regular worship, you had to do an online expression. And the church began to start saying things like, we've all gone on, the church has gone online, the church has started doing worship online, the church has found the internet, blah, blah, blah. And of course, that's a massive insult to those who've been doing online church or digital church for the last decades or 2 or 3 decades. And people like Tim Hutchings and others, Doug Zestes in the States, Heidi Campbell and so on, pointed out actually the church has been online ever since the internet started. And so we then kind of said, well, what's the church been doing online? There's been people there online, especially those who can't engage in physical church. So people with physical disabilities, people who are vulnerable, people who are housebound, who've been there all the time. And to some extent, the mainstream church, if you want to call it that, was colonizing their space. And that colonizing language is very difficult because you end up with natives and colonizers and so on, which can be difficult. But so when we then began to get the other end of lockdown, and everybody kind of then started saying, well, what are we going to do in this new kind of space where we've got physical church available for a few, but still lots of people locked down into church. I mean, you know, a large church down in the southeast that I'm aware of, you know, they did a survey, and I mean, they've got a huge group of Anglican church. 30% of their congregation want to be physical, and 70% of their church want to be on the internet, online still. So that kind of church suddenly becomes a hybrid church, and then that's kind of taken wings, as it were, and this concept of what a hybrid church means. Can I just go on a little bit more? Because I think that the really interesting thing here is I think it's something about God, not really about us creating a definition or somebody creating a kind of concept of hybrid church. One of the things I was doing towards the end of lockdown was looking about what God's up to and noticing on Google Trends that the trends for God and prayer and Jesus were kind of going a lot higher than online church. That God seems to be out there engaging with people. So the stats that TFN and Christian Aid and Comres brought up are now matched by a Durham poll that we've done with Savanta Comres, in which about 27% of the people in the UK are attending online worship, in the same way that people attend regular offline worship before the pandemic. But when they were doing it offline, there's only between 7 and 10% of people attending. So the numbers of people coming to online worship seems to have trebled or quadrupled over that period. Why? Is this something that God is up to? Is this Missio Dei in action, the mission of God, purposefully engaging people and inviting them into a space that they find safe and accepting and welcoming, and that hybrid church may well have been birthed out of Missio Dei rather than some theologian having a good idea about something. And I think that's theologically, I think that's absolutely profound.
Thank you. So something there about hybrid church being the best of both worlds, that it's the best of what we can do when we can be face to face, when we can interact, when we can break bread and drink wine, but also how we do the online stuff really well, so that we're not replicating church online, but we're actually developing what it is to have an online church and an online Christian presence, which develops people's spirituality and their discipleship in a robust fashion there. So it's kind of the partnership model.
Yeah, the partnership model is huge. I mean, I think that if you take online church seriously, I don't think there's anything you can't do online that you can do offline. So I'm not a fan of saying that there are things exclusively that we can only do in physical church. I don't agree that online communion is a no-go. And we may get into that later. But actually, if you want church and you say the hybrid church is actually a model where we accept ecclesial density for both physical and online church, then I think you've got to accept ecclesial density. You've got to say that this is somewhere where God is at work, discipling people, offering the means of grace, encouraging, converting people, encouraging people, blessing people, the whole lot. And that both physical and online are both places where God's presence dwells, and that we can encounter him there.
I think for me it's been so important to recognise that God is present and active in those cracks and those spaces and those gaps that we have in the midst of lockdown, being isolated from each other, and we've needed God to transcend that distance and to actually recognise that God is within those spaces, and to let God continue to let life flourish now that we're coming back into new normal, or whatever other clunky language we're looking at in this still COVID life that we have.
One of the ways that this started, I think, was through Zoom Coffee. And about a third of the way into lockdown, we began to see Zoom coffee meetings becoming more and more popular. Kind of coffee after church, where people could come and say wave at one another and go into breakout rooms and have a chat and so on. But also kind of just dropping in with people and sitting with people in a room, drinking coffee and chatting and so on. This sense of social presence and social ease with people, that this could now be an engagement where we were really with people rather than separated by the screen, as it were. And Zoom isn't perfect, and you know, nor YouTube or Facebook or whatever model you want to use. We rarely connect. You know, I'm aware that I've got to look at the green light up there in order to really fix my eyes on you. But if that's the case, then I'm not really looking at I want to look at myself, because they're the eyes I can see. So, and if I look at the picture of Joe, then I'm kind of looking sideways, as it were, rather than looking up. And so there is all this stuff about connection, and the technology doesn't quite do it for us as you would in real life. But it's an approximation, which is better than nothing.
And I think, I mean, we'll get onto some of the challenges later, but there is something about letting the resources do what they're good at, rather than trying to get them to do what we expect or need them to do. So Zoom does work really well because it's about bringing communities together, but actually for streaming a service is quite clunky and difficult. And the same for Microsoft Teams. If you're used to using Microsoft Teams in school, then church can look an awful lot like the lessons that you're meant to be engaging with your teachers, and so you're not necessarily likely to then want to do brownies or Sunday school using Microsoft Teams. So there's a lot of learning that I'm recognizing that I still need to do to make sure that I'm using the right platform for the right thing, but that actually my voice as a Christian leader is the right language and the right sensibility for the platform that I'm using. If I'm expecting to use Facebook Live or stream a live service that will go to the wider community, I'm going to talk very differently to if I'm in a closed group of people who I know. I would use an awful lot more shorthand, or we'll use some in-jokes, but actually if we're doing a broadcast media, it's a very different posture. And so there are all sorts of challenges there about how we let the technology do the helpful stuff, and not try and do or use the technology unhelpfully.
I think, let's just jump into media theory and everything. So I don't really like McLuhan, but Marshall McLuhan said back in the 70s that technology is an extension. It extends our abilities, extends what humans can do already. And kind of we see that here, that, here I am in Durham. I've been stuck here since March. Well, I haven't, 1 or 2 trips recently, but I've been working in my room, in my study, and therefore the internet becomes a kind of extension of my place. I can now lecture, I can teach in Kiev or in Singapore, or in Australia, or wherever, doing webinars all over the place. The ability to actually kind of say that I don't just need to be here, I can actually be teaching in other places. Am I doing that, or I'm still here? But at the same time, my presence is elsewhere as well. And that's what we've been doing as well in kind of, we've always been doing that in sermons, and in the whole kind of teaching modules that we do. We can be recorded on a sermon, and that word of God can go out into the world through recordings and so on. John Piper can tweet us, or Nadia Boltz-Weber can tweet, and her presence, her words can be part and parcel of our kind of consciousness during the day. So media extends our ability, our range of voice, just like microphones do, just like preaching does, just like auditoria do, like Gwyneth Pitt and everything. So we need to kind of accept that this is a technology which pushes us further.
I wonder what for you might be some of the scriptures that you go to in thinking about hybrid church.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think so. First of all, the kind of overarching thing for me is that passage in Ephesians where Christ is over all, through all, and in all. That for me is the governing passage. This sense that God is not just a God of temples. He burst the temple apart, split the screen apart, the veil apart, and the whole idea of God invading the earth at the resurrection, or sorry, at the crucifixion, and the sense that God is now part and parcel of his presence. He didn't need to hide away in the Holy of Holies. Instead, he's abroad upon the whole land. And Paul builds upon that, whoever wrote Ephesians builds on that, to kind of say, God is omnipresent across all time and space and everything, that God is an eternal reality for us. And there has been a kind of shift by those who wanted churches to stay open, to shift back into the idea of the church as temple, as a place where God dwells. And I'm worried about that, because I think that the church is the body of Christ, the ecclesia, the people who are called out to be different from the world, to be one, to be united, to be focused upon Christ. And so church as people versus church as temple becomes quite an interesting model. We use chapel buildings because we like to meet somewhere. We need somewhere dry and warm to kind of sit in the cold winters or the cold summers. We come together to share our fellowship with one another, to learn together, to be discipled together. But we don't come because God is somehow specially present in that place. He's specially present because we're there. It's not like when we leave the chapel premises, God sat there at the front on his own, kind of looking around saying, what am I supposed to do now? you know, God goes with us. He is in us, Christ in us, the hope of glory. And that then therefore means Ephesians, Christ in all, through all, and over all, means that he is in the internet. He is in digital space. He is in the kind of space in between everything, as well as in everything. So it's not quite panentheism, it's not pantheism either, but it is that a real acceptance of God's omnipresence, of Christ's omnipresence across all the different media. That absolutely has to undergird it, because there's a lot of stuff coming out from the States about how digital is terrible and evil and awful. I just don't get that. Digital is just a tool that we can make evil or we can make good. It depends upon our use of that tool and how we develop that tool further. So that's absolutely crucial to me.
We've spoken a little bit about the dangers or criticisms of hybrid church and used some of the language from the States. I just wonder whether there are anything else that we just need to be alert to in terms of some of the critiques of hybrid church at this very, very early stage of us exploring what it looks like. I think I put a marker out that one of my churches, there is 30 people in the congregation and only one person has a computer. So something about digital poverty and digital exclusion, I think we may need to talk about, but you may have other things to add into that as well.
Yes, I think that's really true. That as we found with homeschooling, we need to just be careful about digital as being a kind of middle class thing, or upper class thing. What is the ability to engage? Most people have mobile phones, but even there, who has access? You know, there are people who don't have exclusive access. Do we need to provide low-cost resources for people to engage with what's going on? You know, there's a couple of lads up here in Newcastle who didn't have a computer, but they were given kind of pretty cheap Amazon Fire tablets, and suddenly they could learn, do their lessons and so on. The problem was not being able to read on a small mobile screen. They needed a slightly bigger screen in order to do it. So there are low-cost ways of getting people online, and here at Durham we're trying to do that. But it's also the case of people are scared of digital, and so those people who haven't grown up embraced in digital or immersed in digital find it hard to even get over the psychological idea of having church online and so on. When they get there, because somebody else has shown them or sat with them or you know, taught them what it's about, they kind of come alive with the possibilities that is there. But some people never will, and so hence the kind of need to be hybrid and not just digital. The digital divide is real. It's still there, and in rural areas especially, broadband is awful. And so there's got to be some kind of sense of how we get across those divides. But there's other areas as well. In the digital also is made to do things that kind of are inimical to the Christian faith as well, because it's there to change who we are, to change our appearances, to change our identities. We can be one person offline and another person online, or we can be several people online. We can kind of make up our identity as we go along. There has to be some kind of authenticity at the core of who I am, to ensure that we're not actually trying to fake it until we make it one of the phrases and so on. That actually there has to be an authenticity, that this is the real Pete that you're looking at, this is the real Pete who's engaging with you, and I'm not just kind of trying to make all this up. I mean, you know, I can get rid of my virtual background here and show you the kind of mess of my study. That's a bit better, isn't it? Because then you actually see something of what it's about. You can see the cross behind me, but Mickey Mouse below him. So that side, you can see the Man United thing there, which will please some people and not others. You can see the green screen dangling across. Do you know what I mean? You see the detritus of my life. And these kind of virtual backgrounds and everything put us into a different space and a different kind of context into who we are. And so we've got to be careful about digital. We've got to be careful about being real and authentic, and we've got to be careful about digital divides. That's just some of the ones we've got to be careful about. What do you think, Joe?
I think that there is something there about how we measure stuff as well, that actually so often we measure stuff by click rate or by how long people stay on a page, and the risk with that is that a lot of kind of interactive social media stuff are designed to give you a dopamine hit, so it's meant to make you feel better, and if we're only doing it on click rate, then we're only doing it on the short-term high that individuals get by seeming that they're popular. And so there is something for me about how our egos actually need to not be measured by click rate or how long people stay on a site. But we need to work on those kind of more qualitative markers of discipleship, which in hybrid is actually really helpful, because that's what we should be doing anyway. That actually we shouldn't necessarily be limiting our stats to the number of people in a building on the amount of money in a collection. It does the same dopamine high. But we should be modeling our discipleship and our Methodist way of life in a very different way, and setting those markers in place. So I think that there is something about how we measure, and just being cautious of how we're attracted to short-term fixes. I'm aware that we've been talking for a while, so I'm going to ask you one more question. If you were going to set up a hybrid church, what would be the first 3 things that you would do?
So find a church which is willing to experiment with the possibilities. And the second is to begin to do some serious online ministry, which is attractional to those people around. So, for example, how can you stream your physical worship in such a way that you include others? Do things like doing the Facebook ad, which Beacon Luff and Gateshead did. You can advertise within a mile of your church's location on Facebook, and they found that's how they quadrupled their viewership. And gradually over the time, people have viewed more and more of their YouTube videos, both synchronously and asynchronously, and their viewing times are now up to about 37 minutes, which, you know, a 45-minute sermon service is good. It's excellent, actually. And so it's kind of getting the thing going, and attracting that new missional audience, working with God about what that is. But the other thing is doing the kind of stuff that Joe was talking about, and that is prayer ministry and prayer and engagement. Showing people online that actually God is real and active in our world, and can do great things. And so, you know, I've done a prayer course with a church miles away during the last few weeks, and learned loads about prayer and been part of a praying community. And now we pray on a Tuesday night with a prayer group, and we have a WhatsApp prayer group and so on that's going on. And also we are starting a contemplative prayer group in the next couple of days. So it's kind of getting the practicalities going, but also getting the devotional going and getting it right. The fourth thing, sorry, then these are 3, but I'm going to do 4th. The 4th is to remember the physical needs of the congregation. How do we carry one another's burdens? And that means kind of regularly encouraging both physical and online church members to have a connection back to the congregation for their needs. So what do you need this week? Do you need somebody to phone you up and talk to you? Hopefully we're doing that anyway. Do you need a box of food or resources or rations? Do you need just somebody to come and sit outside the window to be with you? Do you need a trip to the doctors? These kind of practical models of what we're doing. And 5thly, copy Joe's idea of the blackboard, because that's superb.
Thank you. wouldn't necessarily say the latter one, but I think that there is finding the ways to speak well-being in a situation that is struggling with the grief and loss that you also vulnerably shared there. So thank you.
We'll have about 15 minutes in breakout rooms to have some conversations around that. What surprised you? What challenged you? What might you imagine hybrid church might look like for you? And what might you need to create hybrid church? Any of those kind of conversations. As I said, we have a wide variety of folks here, some who have been doing this for a long time, some for whom it's very new. We have folks from all over the world here today, so introduce yourselves. It's been lovely to sort of see everybody saying hello in the chat, so continue to do that. It's nice to know where you all come from. So that's very cheery and exciting. Let's just have a quick look at these questions as a wee reminder. From what you've heard so far today, what has surprised you? What's challenged you? Pete and Joe talk about hybrid churches being the best of both online and offline. What can you imagine the best of both worlds looking like in your context? What are some of the challenges you can imagine needing to overcome as you work towards this? What support would be helpful on this journey, creating a hybrid church? So some time to nip into breakout rooms. We'll give you 15, perhaps a little bit over 15 minutes, and we'll give you a kind of 5-minute warning when your conversations are due to kind of end. We'll give you a countdown. Welcome back, friends. We were just laughing about some of you taking the to your last second of conversation. Welcome back. It's very good to have you all back with us again. I hope you had good conversations in your breakout rooms. As we've got Pete with us for a wee while, and we're very grateful, Pete, that you've taken a little bit of time out of your annual leave to be with us for a wee bit of time this afternoon. I thought it would be really good to just kind of catch up with you, Pete, a little bit on, obviously, you know, that you said that video was taken in the summer, and we're in a kind of different place now, perhaps with hybrid church. And I thought it would be good for Pete just to catch up on some of his thinking now about hybrid church and where we're at with that. And so I've asked Pete to do 10-15 minutes on where hybrid church might be now, and then we'll have time for question and answers. So friends, if you've got some questions and answers that came from your small groups, if you want to put them on the chat, Trish and I will scroll through them, and we'll see if we have a couple of bit of time to just check in with one or two of those from the breakout rooms. And if you haven't let us know where you come from on your chat, please do that as well, because it's really great to have a whole variety of folks here and friends that Pete and I have met across in our conversations on digital. So Pete, over to you. Let me just see if I can unspot myself, and then we can hand over to you.
Thanks, Odie. Just let me put a quick PowerPoint up for you. So I hope you can all see that. Just let me grab the thing back. Zoom just takes over too much space. Okay, so what I wanted to do is kind of briefly look at some issues that we're looking at at the moment around hybrid church, and some of that focus upon the thinking rather than the updates, because we don't know what's going to happen in hybrid church. We don't know what's going to happen when the lockdown is closed at the weekend. We don't know what's going to the new tiering system's going to be. Hopefully churches will be open, and it's a crucial time then really to think about whether everyone's going to jump back into church and simply do church there, or will we actually embrace what we're trying to do with hybrid, is to say offline and online together, so that you might have a congregation, part of the congregation in church, sadly often looking like zombies because they kind of space socially with masks on, yeah? But you then might have some congregation who are online through Zoom or through live streaming what you're doing in physical church and so on. So hybrid is about how do we put online and on-site together? Yeah, how do we merge those two congregations? And I don't think it's just streaming from your church to the people online. It's actually acknowledging that the people online are the congregation as well. So how do you include them back into physical church? How do you stream them back in? And I think that has to do with presence. And so we've been thinking a lot about presence in various talks I've been doing at the moment. Hopefully this will work. There you go. And I do want to kind of question this whole thing. How do we make ourselves present to one another? How does the body of Christ represent itself to one another when we do church? You know, how do we say that the body of Christ is both online and on site, or online and in church? And how do we make that real for people? I think for me there has to be some sacraments around that. And I'll still persist in saying that I think the Methodist Church is wrong in not allowing sacraments for communion online, or allowing permission for communion online, not least because too many Methodists will have died in the last 9 months without receiving bread and wine, the means of grace, as Wesley called it. And I think that we do need to have proper presence online and on site. So are we present to one another? Well, I'm present to you and you're present to me. I can see your faces, and I try and get some on you, what have you. I try to have more pictures on the screen, as much pictures as I can, so that I can actually see how people are responding to what I'm doing, because I don't want to be in a kind of room where I'm just kind of talking to thin air. I'm talking to people, I'm talking to you. You know, whether you're whether you're in front of a bookshelf, or Andrew Holmes' kind of staff space kind of thing there in America, or, you know, whoever it might be, Bill Offler kind of peering into his screen. Hello, Bill, nice to see you. Yeah, so lots of different ways in which I'm connecting with you and making my presence known and allowing you to be present to me as well. Yeah, so we are together online. I do want to question whether we're together as well offline in a church, because that's a situation as well. When we're masked and socially distanced, how do we actually connect with one another in church when we can't connect? Or indeed, how do we do it normally? I've been to some churches in my time. I've been a Methodist minister now for ages, 25 years or more. And I've been to plenty of Methodist churches where it's possible to walk in the front door, sit down, have a whole hour's service and get out without speaking to anybody. Yeah, and you kind of sit there. I see a few nodding heads. And you sit there kind of, you know, watching the back of somebody else's head and singing the hymns and listening to the person at the front doing everything and walking out. How do we make presence known? Or even in a big church like this one on the screen, how does that lady in the front there with her hands raised connect with the people on the back row at the top? Are they present to one another? What do we mean by the body of Christ present to one another? And I don't think there's much difference between that kind of big church and the idea that the body of Christ is spread both over physical and digital church. And of course, hybrid church isn't about saying everything must be digital. It is clearly not that. It's saying there must be both physical and digital. So here's some books I pushed earlier on. Liquid Church by Pete Ward, I kind of put into the notes. Classic book, which really kind of looks at the whole network society and says we need a new church for the new age. And Pete Ward's part of missional thinking, where missiology and what we do about our mission comes to the fore. I'll come back to Jay Kim's book in the middle, which is the complete opposite of Pete's book and my book. And then this little pamphlet that Joe Cox-Darling has written a chapter in, and Matthew Lewis and Bryony Taylor and myself a couple of chapters. And it's only £3.95 from Grove Books. It's about, 20 pages long. Look, it's really thin. Yep. And it's a book on hybrid church that we put together. And I was a huge advocate of digital church. And then when I was asked by Church Mission Society to write this pamphlet booklet thing. And when I asked 4 digital people to give me something what they were doing in the COVID pandemic, they wrote up something which was both physical and digital, blending online and offline community. And that's where we shifted to the model of hybrid church, that we needed the best of both worlds. Jay Kim in the middle wants to say no digital. Let's just keep with the analog church. Let's go back to grandma's church. Okay, he actually used the phrase, let's go back to grandma's church. Okay, and grandma's church can be really romantic, and you can kind of think it's a wonderful, wonderful place. Just look at the stats, guys and gals. The stats show us quite clearly that grandma's church is dying. Yeah, and we need to be very, very careful about going back to grandma's church simply because of romance, and because we think it's going to be the good old days, because we think if we run grandma's church, all the kids are going to come rushing back to the Sunday school. or all the people are going to come running in from their various pastimes that they do on a Saturday, Sunday, and what have you now. Analog church, totally digital church, I think, is a misnomer. It's an escape from reality rather than escape into reality. So I'm passionately not very happy with it. I've read J. Kim's book and had conversations with him about it. I'm still not very happy with the way that it's put across. There's a 5-minute video here on what I think is the future, and if you want to know where we might need to go, then it may be.
My name's Wade Watt.
Then it may be in looking at Ready Player One. It's a film, Warner Brothers film, Steve Spielberg film, about what the future might look like. In a world where climate change is going to bring more and more pandemics, in a world where we are part of the extinction process. Yep, it's not just animals, insects, birds, and everything that are being made extinct. We are at risk of extinction. Okay, and in that kind of a world, we will need the internet to connect us together, because the world outside will be a dangerous place. Ready Player One, the film, kind of builds a world in which those two things go together. The alternative, of course, is to say no more technology, let's throw it away. And we've seen organizations which have done that. Here's the Amish in America, German-speaking in Pennsylvania, German-speaking cult or sect who reject technology because they want to live in a pre-industrialized society. But you can see on the left, the right, sorry, a young man in the shop reading from his mobile phone with plenty of tech in the background, card readers and everything there, a printer, a computer, and so on. What technology is worth? It's almost as though that like capitalist technology is okay, but you know, which digital technology is okay. It's almost like he's holding a Palm Pilot, I think, but maybe not. We've got to be very, very careful about what we decide to do with tech and where we want to go with it. And of course, Richard Niebuhr, it's not Rowan, it's Richard, sorry, I should change it. Richard Niebuhr had this idea that there were 4 different approaches to culture. You could be a church of culture, which is perhaps something of what we're trying to do with hybrid, that we're trying to embed church within contemporary culture. Certainly hybrid fits into church transforms culture, because it says we want to transform digital culture and make it more Christian, make a Christian presence within digital culture. But then Grandma's church, of course, is church against culture. It's saying, let's ditch digital and go back to, you know, having log burn fires in the church and what have you. And then church above culture at the top, where you have 2 kingdoms, a church culture and a human culture, and the 2 are completely separate from one another, kind of Lutheran or model, which kind of Bonhoeffer struggled with in the war and so on. J. Kim kind of fits against the church against culture kind of model, in that he wants to kind of push against that. I will perhaps come back to that in a bit. But perhaps it's not either or. Perhaps it's not a case of saying we don't want anything of the past, we just need to move into the future. The whole thing about hybrid church is this idea that it's both and, not either or. And that's the thing that I'm really, really passionate about. Missiologically, we have to include the network church into what we're doing. We have to include network society into what we're doing, digital society. We have to include those people that rarely come out of their homes, want to engage, the disabled, the vulnerable, the long-term ill and so on. How do we open up church for them because they can't get to our buildings or don't want to come into our buildings? But also, how do we include the huge numbers of people, the huge numbers of people, probably 15 million people who are now viewing online church at some point or other. Okay, our normal attendance in the UK is 4 million on a good Sunday. Okay, during the lockdown, so the opinion polls tell us 15.3 million seem to be attending online worship. I don't want to say our congregation has been increased to 15.3 because it's a poll, and polls are polls are polls. But there's a huge number of people now connecting. Missiologically, we have to connect with those people and share the good news with them, share about Jesus with them, share the hope that they can have through Jesus. And we need to do that through hybrid church, I reckon. again, here I kind of put those books where I think they're kind of going. I think we have to be transforming our society and also making it relevant. I'm not going to do this, but this is some conversation I do in another talk. I've just nicked this slide from somebody else I'm doing on Thursday. That technology isn't something that's of the devil. It's actually God who's the technologist. And because we're made in his image, we too are technologists, that we share in that engagement with technology and creation, creativity. And my whole kind of thing is today about really saying, well, what would Jesus do about this? Where would Jesus go in a pandemic, in a lockdown? And I can't believe that he would just sit in his house in Capernaum and just kind of sit there and wait for it all to finish. Jesus would be making use of all of the possibilities around him in order to reach out to people and connect and disciple them. Final word, because Fiona said give 10 minutes and I've probably spoken far too long already. The big winner over the last 12 months or the last 9 months has not necessarily been Sunday worship. The big winner is discipleship. Okay, people have learnt more about Jesus. The number of people attending regular prayer events like morning prayer in the Church of England or Compline in the Iona community and Northumbria communities. The people who are attending prayer courses, as I mentioned in the video, we've done one. But Prayer 24/7, the tool shed there, so many of those courses have been used all over the place. People doing Advent celebrations now as they kind of approach Christmas. People are already preparing materials for COVID Lent next year. And people can do those now from the joy of their own houses. They don't have to come to a cold Methodist chapel. They can sit in their front room or the dining room and sit there and listen and engage more and reach more. Alpha's got worldwide now has more people doing it than ever before. Okay, so it's discipleship that wins here. And as Wesley said, we need to be making disciples, not just converts. Yep. The big issue for us now is to think about how we get those 15.3 million people who may be watching online to be disciples, not just people who view a YouTube. Yeah? How do we get them engaged in the church? How do we get them to learn more about what Christianity is about? How do we teach them about Jesus and about what it means to be a Methodist? And to do acts of grace and acts of mercy and to engage in all those things that make us who we are. And I think that's the big thing for Hybrid Church for the future. Not just how do we get people to come and see online church, how do we get them to engage and become disciples? I'll finish. Stop. I'll shut. Fidge, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Pete. Do you want to just, yeah, I was going to say stop the screen sharing. I thank you very much. That's really interesting. We've got quite a few questions coming in, and it might be good for us to just kind of very quickly go through some questions and answers. Lydia asking, how do we engage with families, especially for children who find Zoom online? Bit of a conversation with Louise and some folks about young people. We've been talking about the whole Instagram kind of thing. When I was at the Premier Digital, I was giving a little plug to the 3Gen reps who are doing their Wednesday worship. Any thoughts on how we engage children, young people digitally?
Yeah, I think the huge problems so the idea is because we provide a new space, we've then got to make sure that space is properly safeguarded, and so we need to create an inclusive space. And how do we protect that space? So Zoom has actually got some good controls around that to make safeguarding possible. And we need to actually limit ourselves. So limit what other people can do, like sharing their screens and stuff like that. And perhaps even muting everybody so that you can't get Zoom bombed and everything. Protect your Zoom passwords and meetings. Don't put them on the church website. Make sure you send them out to arrange and what have you. But also there's lots and lots of ways. So Chris, Fiona talked about the Premier Digital Conference last week. 1,400 people attended, and we kind of had Zoom from 10 o'clock in the morning all the way through to 4 o'clock in the afternoon. One of the talks is from Chris Curtis, who's head of Youth for Christ, and spoke on Youthscape, and he talked about what the possibilities are for engaging with children. Joanna Gordon, if you look up her on Facebook, and Daniel's Den, they've been doing live toddler groups all the way through the lockdown and beyond, and have kind of shown good ways of doing that. And also because the lockdown, doing live toddler groups mean you then start having pastoral care for the mothers as well, because mothers and fathers as well, because the parents, because they come along and engage in what's happening with the young people as well. So it's a really good way to keep church connected and so on. Huge problems with it, of course, but loads of resources out there from Youth for Christ, Youthscape, and Daniel's Den and others that have those possibilities.
Okay, lovely, great, thank you. And if you've got some conversation around that, please put it in the chat as we keep that going, and we will save the chat and send that to you as part of our post-conference package. Rob asking about, are we just replicating, when we do online, are we just replicating the physical? Is there space for a kind of digital only churches? How do we do fresh expressions of church online, any of that kind of thing?
Yeah. So I think we're going to, the future will be a mixed mode church, yeah, as we've had with mixed mode church before, and I think that some churches will go back to being only physical only, and you know that's going to happen. I think there also have to be space for digital only churches as well, and you know, things that places which are thin spaces for God in the digital space. I think that's really interesting because it's actually doing church online. Sorry, it's doing online church rather than church online. Yeah, it's just not replicating the physical. It's actually doing something that is made for digital. Yep, and runs in a digital environment. And I think that's okay. No, I think that's brilliant. And if people have got the time and energy to do that, do it. For me, I think one of the problems with having physical only and digital only is you end up with this dichotomy between either or. Only this morning, somebody was kind of ranting at me on Twitter that just as you can't bring up a child online, so you can't have church online. Okay, that internet church, digital church isn't real. Okay, that's bunkum. It's a load of rubbish. You know, internet church is as much God's church as it is as physical churches. Yeah, God didn't say anywhere, thou shalt gather together physically in a specific place, in a place of the spire, or a place that looks like a tin chapel or whatever. Yeah, he didn't say you have to meet inside this building. Indeed, he went out of his way. Jesus in John 4, you won't meet in either the temple or on Gerizim. God wants worshippers who worship him in spirit and in truth. The sense that you deplace worship. Yep. And so how do we do that? And we've got to get away from these barriers that say it's physical church or nothing, or it's digital church and nothing. And hybrid's really trying to push this kind of thing to say it's the best of both worlds. But that best of both worlds means both worlds still exist in their own entirety. Yeah, digital church is as much church as physical church and needs to be welcomed and explored.
Good, lovely. I'm slightly hesitant to ask you this next question, only because we've only got 10 minutes left until we're officially allowed to our official ending time. But here's an interesting one, Pete. You'll love this. Susan asking about online communion.
Yeah.
I know you have. Yeah. I know you have a few things to say about that.
I think that there are lots of ways of doing online communion. And there are some ways in which we can do very similar things. For example, Nell Shallow, Methodist minister in Lincoln, has throughout the pandemic done agape feasts. And that's a way in which we can share some cake and water, or, you know, something solid, something drink in a liturgical festival. And that's really, really good. Others like Miranda Threlfall Holmes, Anglican in St. Bride's in Liverpool, places bread and wine in front of her screen and says, come, let's take bread and wine together. Calvin Samuel, a Methodist minister in Southend, has regularly done that communion, gathers his family around the table and invites them to share the bread and wine with his hands outstretched like this, which embraces those on the screen. Yep. Now, Calvin doesn't then invite people to take their own bread and wine in their house, because that would be illegal. It would be, improper, because the Faith and Order Committee and the Methodist Conference has said you can't do it. Dana DeLapp, who's an Anglican minister, Anglican vicar, she did do that. She went further and did communion, and consecrated elements offline, and invited her congregation to share in bread and wine, and she was reprimanded by her bishop for doing so. I think that despite all those kind of different kind of models, we do need to kind of push the Methodist Church to say that it's possible for God to consecrate at a distance. As soon as we say that God can't do something, we're in deep, deep theological trouble. Deep, deep trouble. If God cannot consecrate a piece of bread that's here in my room and there in your room, then he's not up to much, is he? Yep. So if God can consecrate these things by me as a Methodist presbyter saying a prayer which invites him to consecrate them, then why can't we share consecrated bread and wine together, across the airways, as it were, and share in fellowship in that way? I don't see that it's a problem. God is bigger than our current theology, and I think that's what it's all about. And yes, somebody has put in, Jesus said, if two or more are gathered. And are we not gathered now in this Zoom place? Could we, as two or three are gathered, not come and share bread and wine together? I have some... Sorry.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's an ongoing conversation, not just for the Methodist Church. Maybe time for a couple more questions. Alan was asking about how do we explore personhood at a deeper level, the whole anthropology of what's happening to us as human beings. Any thoughts around some of that?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, because I think however much I push for digital, and I've pushed for the sense of presence, then I still think that there is something deeply depersonalizing about lockdown. We've all been pushed into our homes, into aloneness, even aloneness with families. And I don't think that we're made to be alone. I think that we're made for community. We're made to be social. We are social animals. David Brown's big book on humanity as a social animal. And I think that means that social space is really, really important for us. And even the boxes that are on my Zoom screen at the moment, I think I've got 20 boxes at the moment with individuals or one couple in, remind us that the lockdown is indeed a prison that we need to get out of. And as soon as the vaccine comes, praise God that we'll be able to do it. But I think that in the lockdown, digital has been a good alternative, a good enough alternative, that it's given us some access to one another, some access to praying together, some access to worshipping together, some access to seeing our friends and family together. And that's been really, really important. I hope that digital also provides enough connectivity to help us get through. But I don't think, yeah, Bex, I understand. Yeah, I'll come to that in a minute. I don't think that it's going to, because I fear that where we're going with as a human race, I think that we need to make sure that the church is available for all people. So as Beck says, anytime she's on chemo, she basically has to follow lockdown rules and other people are stuck at home. And I know so many people, like in Beck's situation and in lots of other kind of situations that are analogous to that, who cannot come to church. And therefore, we need to provide a kind of stand-in measure for that if the hybrid church kind of offers. And I hope and I pray, I don't think we're there yet, I pray that we will develop greater tools to make online a more personable space. I know what Zoom fatigue is like. You know, I'm on this all the time. I've been teaching and kind of working from home for the last since March really, and I crave going and sharing fellowship with with my friends and family, and I crave being able to teach in a normal situation. But perhaps that's because of where what we're used to rather than what we can be used to. Perhaps we can grow into this and grow into digital being a more normal place to connect with people. And yeah, go back to Ready Player One. Ready Player One, they have haptic suits where you can feel people touching you. And perhaps that's a better place, that we can actually find a place where digital will be a place of touch as well as a place of sight, that the senses will be increased through digital in some way, but we're not there technologically yet.
But maybe not so far away. Pete, I think we're pretty much at our time. Thank you so much for your wisdom and for your time with us today. It's been absolutely fabulous to have you with us, and do thank Teresa for giving you a little bit of time with us on your annual leave. Much appreciated. Friends, we're just going to share the screen a wee bit just to finish off on the resources and things. Pete's spoken a little bit about his book, and thank you very much to everybody that's been writing in the chat, especially Bex and folks that have been offering kind of resources. Pete obviously is working at the Centre for Digital Theology in Durham University. It's lovely to have so many people whose paths we've crossed there with us today. Andrew and Valerie in the States, and Olive and folks in Scotland, and Bex and people. It's really, really good to have your wisdom, and thank you very much for everything in the chat. So quite a few articles and bits and pieces from the Digital Centre of Digital Theology. You also have, Pete, a YouTube. Do you have a YouTube channel as well? No, but there is some kind of stuff on YouTube. I'm sure if you type in digital theology or something, I'm sure I've come across bits and pieces. Joe Cox-Darling book, Finding God in a Culture of Fear, available from BRF Online. Pete mentioned his Hybrid Church book here from Grove Books. Do you want to just give us a quick? Yep, there you go. $3.95, I think, or something like that. An absolute bargain. And quite a few of us here were. Is that something you want to say?
Yeah.
Sorry, but you had your hand up. Quite a few of us here were involved in the digital conference a couple of weekends ago, and there you can purchase and access some of the digital info webinars. And
can I clarify on that? Can I just clarify on that?
Yeah.
So the Premier Digital has a membership system, and your church can become a member for £19 a month, I think it is, something like that. And that up to 10 people from your church can then download all the videos. That's all we had. I think it's 64 speakers on Saturday, and over 100 videos. There's 150 other videos on it, and we're doing talks and all. So you could do that with your local church. You can do it as a personal membership. I think it's $9.99 or something a month, or you can do a free membership of it and get some of the access there for it. So the Premier stuff is really, really interesting. We're developing more and more things, and lots of Methodists coming on that now and doing videos and so on for us and so on, including somebody called Fidge who's doing some great stuff on prayer for us.
Thank you, little plug. So yeah, Premier Digital webinars, have a look at that. And as I said, we are the Learning Network in the Northeast. You can follow us on any of these social media platforms. If you're in the Northeast and you're from the Newcastle upon Tyne district, Pete is also going to be talking at the Mission Hub with Elaine Lindridge on Saturday, the 6th of February. Put that date in your diaries. And we will be back, this group of folks. We're doing a series of digital reflections, and hopefully we will be in touch with what our next course reflection bit of time event together will be about, and I'll be in touch with you about that if you're happy for us to mail out some information. Friends, thank you very much for your time. I hope that's been good. I will save the chat, and this is being recorded. Give me a wee bit of time and I'll send you the link as to where we're posting it. so you can watch that again. If you want to watch the video again with Pete and Joe, that was from the Learning Network West Midlands Facebook page. You can see that again. I'll send the link to that. We've got quite a bit bits and pieces to send out as a kind of post-conference package. So thank you very much for your time and for your engagement. I hope this has been helpful. Let's continue to be attentive and to pay attention to what we think God is calling us to do and to be in this transitional time that we are all living in. Let's pay attention to that and offer our openness to God and to each other. Thank you very much for your conversations, and go well, and I hope the rest of your day is good and fruitful. Thank you.